A rich businessman lost everything, but he was saved by the black maid he always ignored. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Today, I begin with a heartfelt Friday prayer. Heavenly Father, bless every soul listening to my voice. Wipe away their tears, lighten their burdens, and fill their hearts with unshakable peace. Let love find them, let success chase them, and let no darkness dim their light. But my beautiful family, my heart feels a little heavy today. I've noticed something, our connection, the love we share. It feels like it's fading. Is it me? Am I no longer reaching your hearts? Have you found more beautiful channels that touch you deeper than I do? I need an answer because this family means everything to me. I pour my soul into every story, every word, just to make you feel something real. But are you still here with me? Do you still feel me? If you are present, if you still believe in this love, drop a present with love in the comments. Let me feel you, my family. Now, as always, let's start with love. The 64th floor penthouse of Onyx Tower cast a long shadow over Manhattan's financial district as evening descended. Within its walls, Bodhi Jet stood motionless before floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette sharp against the blazing sunset. At 47, he commanded an empire that had transformed skylines across 3 continents. Power emanated from him like heat from a furnace. 2 billion, he said flatly into his platinum smartphone. Not a penny less. If Kingston wants the Dubai property, that's my price. He ended the call without waiting for a response. His reflection gazed back at him, impeccable in a midnight blue Tom Ford suit, salt and pepper hair precisely trimmed, jawline still defiant against age. Bodhi had crafted himself with the same meticulous attention he gave his architectural masterpieces. Everything in his world existed by design: wealth, respect, fear, even love, especially love. Mr. Jet. His executive assistant appeared at the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. Your helicopter is ready. Mrs. Jet called to confirm she'll meet you at the gala. Bodhi didn't turn. And the Nakamura contracts? Signed and executed, the Tokyo acquisition is complete. He permitted himself the faintest smile. Another victory, another billion, another reason the world bent to his will. Good. That will be all. 30 minutes later, his private helicopter descended onto his estate's landing pad. Shadowcrest Manor sprawled across 12 manicured acres, a neo-Gothic monument to ambition realized. 2 Bentleys and a Rolls-Royce gleamed in the circular driveway. A fountain cast water 30 feet into the air, illuminated by lights that made the droplets resemble falling diamonds. Inside, the manor hummed with quiet efficiency. Staff moved like ghosts through the corridors, present only when needed, invisible otherwise. Exactly as Bodhi demanded. He strode through the grand foyer, Italian leather shoes clicking against marble imported from Carrara. A young woman in a simple black uniform was arranging fresh orchids in a crystal vase. She looked up for a half-second too long, then quickly averted her gaze. "Sir," she murmured, stepping aside. Bodhi passed without acknowledgement. In his world, the help remained background scenery. Functional but forgettable. He didn't notice how her hands trembled slightly as he passed, or the intelligence behind her carefully lowered eyes. Bondi Gala had been employed at Shadowcrest for 11 months. At 25, she possessed a quiet dignity that belied her circumstances. Each morning, she rose at 4:30 a.m. in her tiny Bronx apartment, kissed her sleeping mother's forehead, and took 2 buses and a train to arrive at the Jet estate by 6 a.m. Each night, she reversed the journey, arriving home near midnight to check her mother's medications before collapsing into exhausted sleep. This evening, she watched Bodhi disappear up the grand staircase and released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He didn't even see you," came a voice behind her. Verena Oxley, the estate manager, materialized in the doorway. In her 50s, with steel-grey hair and posture like a soldier, she ran Shadowcrest with terrifying precision. "I don't need to be seen, Ms. Oxley," Bondi replied, adjusting the orchids. Verena's eyebrow arched. "Smart girl. In this house, invisibility is job security." She checked her platinum watch. "Mrs. Jett will need her emerald set prepared for tonight's gala. The Cartier one, not the Harry Winston. And make sure—" The front door swung open, admitting a blast of cool evening air and Marlowe Jett. Bondi had always thought it unfair that such beauty could mask such emptiness. At 32, Marlowe possessed the kind of allure that stopped conversations mid-sentence. Tonight, she wore a cream Chanel suit that made her appear luminous against her olive skin. Her dark hair fell in calculated waves around a face that had launched 1,000 gossip columns. "Where is my husband?" Marlowe demanded without greeting, dropping her crocodile handbag onto a side table. "Upstairs, Mrs. Jett," Verena answered. "Shall I tell him you've arrived?" "Don't bother." Marlowe's gaze swept over Bondi dismissively. "You! Get me a martini, 3 olives, Bombay Sapphire, not the cheap gin." "Yes, ma'am." Bondi moved toward the bar cart in the adjacent room. "And make sure to chill the glass properly this time," Marlowe called after her. "Last time it was practically room temperature." In the sanctuary of the bar alcove, Bondi took a steadying breath as she prepared the drink. Through the doorway, she could hear Marlowe speaking in hushed tones on her phone. "He doesn't suspect anything. Yes, tonight's perfect. The gala will have him distracted. No, just use the side entrance like last time." Bondi's fingers stilled on the martini shaker. This wasn't the first such conversation she'd overheard, nor the second. Each time, she debated whether to say something to Bondi. Each time, she remembered her mother's medical bills, the precariousness of her employment, and the way Bondi looked through her as if she were made of glass. She carried the martini back to Marlowe, who ended her call abruptly. "Your drink, Mrs. Jett." Marlowe took it without thanks, sipping critically. "Adequate." Her gaze sharpened. "You're new, aren't you?" "I've been here almost a year, ma'am." Marlowe smiled thinly. "A word of advice. In this house, it's better not to hear things that aren't meant for you. Understand?" The threat hung in the air between them, delicate as a blade. "Perfectly, ma'am." Upstairs, Bondi emerged from his dressing room in formal black tie, adjusting diamond cufflinks. He paused before a portrait of himself that dominated the landing, Bondi Jett at 40, painted by an artist whose work hung in the Metropolitan Museum. In the portrait, his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator. "Admiring yourself again?" Marlowe appeared at the top of the stairs, martini in hand. "Narcissism becomes you, darling." Bondi turned, taking in his wife with appreciative eyes. "And Chanel becomes you, but you'll need to change for the gala." "Already planned." She approached, trailing expensive perfume. "The Valentino is laid out, with the diamonds, of course." "Of course." He accepted the kiss she placed on his cheek. Cool, practiced, perfect for the camera that wasn't there, but might as well have been. Theirs was a marriage performed for an audience, even when that audience was only themselves. "The Huxleys confirmed for our Hamptons weekend," Marlowe said, moving to the bedroom. "Victoria mentioned Leonard is looking to invest substantially in your Singapore development." Bondi nodded, following her. Every social connection in Marlowe's extensive network eventually served a purpose. It was one of the reasons he had chosen her 5 years ago, after his first wife's inconvenient death from cancer. Marlowe had been a model with the right connections, the right look, and the right ambition. A perfect acquisition. "And the Whitneys?" he asked. "Declined. Apparently their divorce is getting messy." Marlowe disappeared into her massive closet. Their loss. Bondi appeared in the doorway with pressed shirts. Your formal shirts, sir. And the studs you requested. Bondi barely glanced at her. Put them on the bed. As she arranged the shirts, Bondi noticed a folder of documents on Bondi's nightstand. Property deeds with confidential stamped across them. The same properties she'd heard Marlowe discussing on the phone. Will there be anything else, sir? She asked, hesitating. No. She gathered her courage. Sir, if I might, I said that will be all. His tone made it clear. Her voice was an unwelcome intrusion in his world. Bondi nodded and withdrew, closing the door silently behind her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, conflict etched across her features. What she knew could destroy the man inside that room. What she didn't know was whether he deserved the warning she couldn't seem to deliver. Downstairs, the house phone rang. Verena answered it, then sought out Bondi with unusual urgency. "It's Mercy Hospital," she said, her voice softer than Bondi had ever heard it. "Your mother." Bondi's world compressed to a single point of dread. "What happened?" "They didn't say, just that you need to come right away." The young woman's hands flew to her throat. "I need to go. My shift isn't over, but I—" "Go," Verena said simply. "I'll cover for you." 20 minutes later, as Bondi sat on a rattling express train heading downtown, Bodie and Marlowe Jet made their grand entrance at the Metropolitan Gala. Cameras flashed, capturing their perfect smiles, their perfect clothes, their perfect life. Neither suspected that their golden cage had already begun to fracture, hairline cracks spreading through foundations built on sand. And neither saw the storm gathering on the horizon, a tempest that would sweep away pretense and power, leaving only the truth of who they really were beneath the glamour and the lies. Some cages, no matter how golden, are destined to break open, and some hearts, no matter how guarded, are destined to be found. Chapter 2. Shadows and Whispers. The fluorescent lights of Mercy Hospital cast harsh shadows across Bondi's face as she sat beside her mother's bed. Anise Gala's once robust frame now seemed lost among the white sheets, her dark skin ashen against the institutional bedding. The doctors had been blunt. Her condition was deteriorating faster than expected. The experimental treatment they'd discussed would cost $175,000, money that existed in a world Bondi could only glimpse through the windows of Shadowcrest Manor. "You shouldn't worry so much," Anise whispered, her voice thin but her spirit undiminished. "Your face will get stuck that way." Bondi forced a smile. "That's what you always said when I was little. And I was right then too." Anise reached for her daughter's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "God doesn't give us burdens we can't carry." "I'm not sure God's consulted my weight limit recently," Bondi murmured, but she squeezed her mother's hand reassuringly. It was past midnight when Bondi finally returned to their apartment in the Bronx, a walk-up with perpetually unreliable heat, but filled with the books, music, and memories that made it home. She collapsed onto the sofa, too exhausted to make it to her bedroom, and set her alarm for 4 a.m. 3 hours of sleep would have to be enough. Morning arrived with brutal swiftness. As Bondi approached Shadowcrest Manor, dawn was just breaking over the estate's perfect symmetry. She slipped in through the service entrance where Verena waited, arms crossed. "Your mother?" the estate manager asked. "Stable for now." Bondi adjusted her uniform. "Thank you for covering for me." Verena nodded curtly. "The Jets returned at 2. Mrs. Jet has requested breakfast in bed at 9. Mr. Jet left for the office at 6. She handed Bondi a folded note. "This was left for you." The note contained a list of additional duties. Marlowe's extensive wardrobe needed reorganizing by designer, color, and season. A task that would consume hours Bondi didn't have. "There's more," Verena added, her expression troubled. Mrs. Jett has scheduled a meeting with Mr. Jett this afternoon regarding staff issues. She mentioned your name specifically. Cold dread settled in Bondi's stomach. Did she say why? Number. But she was on the phone with someone when I passed her study last night. Something about taking care of the problem. Verena's eyes met Bondi's directly. Be careful. The morning passed in a blur of tasks. Bondi moved through the mansion's 42 rooms like a shadow, changing linens, polishing silver, arranging flowers. Every muscle ached from exhaustion, but her mind remained sharp, cataloguing the peculiarities that had become increasingly difficult to ignore. At 11, while dusting the antique secretary desk in the East Wing, she overheard Marlowe in the adjacent room. The property's in Singapore, Marlowe was saying, her voice hushed but excited. Body signed the transfer documents yesterday. Once they're filed next week, we'll have controlling interest through the Shell Corporation. A man's low laughter came in response, not Body's voice. And he suspects nothing? Please, he thinks I can barely balance a checkbook. Meanwhile, I've moved 30 million through the Cayman accounts. Bondi froze, feather duster suspended mid-air. She'd suspected Marlowe's infidelity, but this sounded like something far more calculated. What about the maid? The male voice asked. What about her? You said she might have overheard something. Marlowe's laugh was dismissive. She's nothing. A nobody who needs this job too desperately to risk saying anything. Besides, who would Bodhi believe? Me or some black girl from the Bronx? Bondi's hand tightened around the duster's handle. She had grown accustomed to being invisible in this house, but the casual cruelty of Marlowe's words still cut deep. Still, the man persisted, loose ends are dangerous. Don't worry about her. I have a plan. Marlowe's voice dropped further. By the end of the week, she'll be gone, and we'll have everything we need. Retreating silently, Bondi's mind raced. She needed this job, her mother's medical care, their apartment, everything depended on her salary. But what she'd just heard went beyond marital indiscretion into territory that could destroy Body Jet completely. A man she'd never spoken to, a man who looked through her as if she were made of smoke. At noon, she made a decision. Taking advantage of her lunch break, she slipped into Bodhi's home office and left a note on his desk. Mr. Jett, I believe there is something you should know regarding matters that may impact your personal and financial security. Could we speak privately at your convenience? Respectfully, Bondi Gala. She added her cell number, then returned to her duties, heart pounding against her ribs. That afternoon, while polishing the grand staircase's mahogany banister, Bondi glanced up to see Bodhi Jet returning home unexpectedly early. His tall figure moved with purposeful energy, his expression unreadable as always. He strode past her without acknowledgement, heading directly to his office. Minutes later, her phone vibrated with a text. My office. Now. Straightening her uniform, Bondi took a deep breath and knocked on the heavy oak door. Enter. Body Jet stood behind his desk, her note pinched between his fingers as if it were something distasteful. Sunlight streamed through the windows behind him, casting his face in shadow. You wrote this? He asked without preamble. Yes, sir. Why? Bondi swallowed. I've overheard conversations that I believe you should be aware of, conversations involving Mrs. Jett and certain business holdings. His expression hardened. You're eavesdropping on my wife? No, sir. I mean, not intentionally. I was doing my job when— Your job, he interrupted coldly, is to clean my house, not monitor my personal affairs. Sir, I understand, but no, I don't think you do understand. Body circled the desk, every movement controlled, predatory. Do you know how many people would kill for your position here? How easily replaced you are? The disrespect stung, but Bondi stood her ground. With all due respect, Mr. Jet, I'm trying to help you. Help me. His laugh was short, sharp. And what exactly do you think you know about my life that I don't? Your wife is having an affair, Bondi said quietly, with a man who visits when you're away. They discuss your business holdings, particularly in Singapore. They mentioned shell corporations and Cayman accounts. Something flickered in Bodhi's eyes. Surprise, perhaps doubt, but it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by cold fury. How dare you make such accusations? Based on what? Snippets of conversations you had no right to hear. He stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. My wife graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. She comes from one of the oldest families in Boston. What exactly are your qualifications to interpret complex business discussions you clearly don't understand? Each word hit like a physical blow. Bondi felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but forced herself to continue. Sir, I understand enough to know when someone is planning something harmful. This morning, they specifically discussed taking action against you and against me because they fear what I might have overheard. Enough! Bodhi slammed his hand on the desk. I won't stand here and listen to this domestic spying. Whatever game you're playing, whether it's angling for a raise or something more insidious, it ends now. It's not a game, Bondi insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. Please, just investigate what I'm telling you. Check the Singapore properties. Look into the Shell Corporation. Your wife. My wife, he cut her off icily, is none of your concern. Your employment here, however, is very much my concern, and it's hanging by a thread. The injustice of it burned in Bondi's chest. This man, for all his power and privilege, was willfully blind. She thought of her mother in the hospital bed, of the treatments they couldn't afford, of the long journey home in the dark each night, all to be dismissed like this. I understand, sir, she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I apologize for overstepping. Bodhi nodded curtly, returning to his chair. Get back to work. And Bondi, if you value your position here, I suggest you forget whatever it is you think you heard. Dismissed again, Bondi left the office with her dignity intact, but her hope dwindling. Outside the door, she paused to collect herself. Trouble in paradise? Marlowe's voice came from the shadows of the hallway. She leaned against the wall, wrapped in a silk robe, a knowing smile playing on her perfect lips. I saw you go into my husband's office. Such a private conversation for the help. Bondi straightened her spine. I was just clarifying some duties, Mrs. Jet. Is that so? Marlowe stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming in the narrow space. Funny, because it looked to me like you were getting quite personal with my husband. I assure you, save it. Marlowe's smile vanished. I know girls like you. You see a wealthy man and think you can improve your station. It's pathetic, really. The accusation was so backward, so completely contrary to reality, that Bondi nearly laughed. Instead, she maintained her composure. If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Jet, I have duties to attend to. Marlowe caught her arm as she tried to pass. Let me be perfectly clear. Whatever you think you're doing, whatever little scheme you're running, it won't work. Men like Bodhi see women like you as disposable. Remember that. With that, she released Bondi's arm and glided away toward the master suite, victorious in a battle Bondi hadn't even known they were fighting. That night, as Bondi rode the train back to the Bronx, she made a decision. If Bodhi Jet was too arrogant to see the danger surrounding him, she would protect herself. Starting tomorrow, she would document everything. Conversations, visitors, documents left in plain sight. Not for blackmail, but for insurance. She couldn't save a man determined to drown, but she wouldn't let herself be pulled under with him. As the train rattled through the darkness, Bondi stared at her reflection in the window. Exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes, determination set in the angle of her jaw. She thought about Body Jet, a man so powerful yet so vulnerable, so wealthy yet so impoverished in the things that mattered. And despite everything, despite his disrespect and dismissal, she felt an unexpected pang of sadness for him, because she could see what he couldn't. The gilded cage he'd built around himself was about to become a prison, and when it did, he would find himself truly alone, unless someone cared enough to offer a key. Chapter 3. The Perfect Storm. 3 days passed with excruciating tension. Bondi moved through Shadowcrest Manor with heightened vigilance, a small voice recorder concealed in her pocket. Each evening, she transcribed the day's conversations onto a secured cloud drive, building a digital fortress of truth that no one could access but her. On Thursday morning, she arrived to find Shadowcrest in unusual disarray. Florists swarmed the grand foyer, arranging exotic blooms worth more than her monthly salary. Caterers commandeered the kitchen, prepping for what appeared to be a significant event. "Surprise dinner party," Verena explained, checking items off a clipboard. 30 guests. Mrs. Jet organized it all yesterday. Mr. Jet doesn't even know yet. Bondi frowned. "That's unusual. Apparently it's to celebrate their anniversary." Verena lowered her voice. "Though by my calendar, that's not for another 3 months." The knot of unease in Bondi's stomach tightened. Everywhere she looked, she saw warning signs: Marlowe's furtive phone calls, unfamiliar men arriving with briefcases who never seemed to meet with Bodhi, documents disappearing from his office only to reappear slightly altered. At noon, while Bondi was polishing silver in the butler's pantry, the service door swung open to reveal Demetrius, the chauffeur. His usual crisp uniform was rumpled, his expression troubled. "You need to be careful," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "I just drove Mrs. Jet to meet some man at the peninsula. They didn't know I could hear them through the partition." Bondi set down the silver candlestick she'd been polishing. "What did they say?" "They were talking about tonight's party, about setting someone up." He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair. "They specifically mentioned you, Bondi, said something about making sure you were dealt with before you became more trouble." The warning sent ice through her veins. "Did they say how?" "No, but—" Demetrius broke off as footsteps approached. They both resumed working as Marlowe's personal assistant breezed through. Once they were alone again, Demetrius leaned closer. "Whatever's happening, it's happening tonight. Watch yourself." By late afternoon, Shadowcrest Manor had transformed into a glittering showcase. Crystal chandeliers blazed with light, champagne fountains bubbled in 3 rooms, and staff in formal black and white moved with orchestrated precision. Bondi had been reassigned to upstairs duty, far from the guests, far from witnesses. As she changed the linens in a rarely used guest suite, her phone vibrated with a text from her mother's nurse. "Doctor wants to discuss new treatment option. Can you come tomorrow morning?" Hope flickered briefly. She quickly responded, "I'll be there at 8. The sound of the master suite door opening down the hall caught her attention. Marlowe's voice drifted toward her, unusually cheerful. "The Bulgari sapphires, I think, and have my Louboutins ready, the red ones." Bondi stepped back from the doorway, but not quickly enough. Marlowe spotted her and smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent warning signals flaring. "Ah, Bondi, just the person I was looking for." Marlowe approached, her casual elegance belying the predatory gleam in her eyes. "I need you to help me prepare for tonight." "Of course, Mrs. Jet." "In my dressing room, 5 minutes." Bondi finished the bed linens, then steeled herself before entering Marlowe's domain, a room larger than Bondi's entire apartment, lined with custom cabinetry showcasing millions in designer clothing and accessories. Marlowe sat at her vanity, a vision in silk loungewear, watching Bondi's reflection in the mirror. "Close the door." Bondi obeyed, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. Her hand brushed against the recorder in her pocket. "I need you to help me decide." Marlowe gestured to two velvet jewelry cases on the vanity. The sapphires or the emeralds for tonight? It was such a normal request that Bondi momentarily wondered if she'd imagined the danger. "The sapphires would complement your eyes, ma'am." Marlowe opened both cases, the stones catching light like captured stars. "What about this?" She lifted a diamond necklace from a third case, a magnificent piece with a central stone the size of a quail's egg. "My anniversary gift from Bodhi, worth more than you'll earn in a lifetime." The casual cruelty of the comment didn't surprise Bondi anymore. "It's beautiful, Mrs. Jett." "Yes, it is." Marlowe examined it thoughtfully. "You know, wealth is wasted on some people. My husband, for instance. All this money, all this power, and he has no idea how to truly enjoy it. No imagination." Bondi remained silent, sensing the conversation was veering into dangerous territory. "I, on the other hand," Marlowe continued, "have plans. Vision." She stood suddenly, moving to stand directly before Bondi. "Do you have vision, Bondi? Or are you content to clean other people's toilets forever?" "I'm grateful for my job, Mrs. Jett." "Grateful," Marlowe echoed with distaste. "How uninspiring." She returned to the vanity, opening a drawer to remove something Bondi couldn't see. "I have a task for you tonight. During the party, I want you to deliver a package to Bodhi's office. A surprise." Warning bells clanged in Bondi's mind. "Wouldn't you prefer to give it to him yourself, ma'am?" "No, this requires discretion." Marlowe turned, and now Bondi could see what she held, an antique silver box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "You'll take this to his office at exactly 9 o'clock. Not before, not after." Bondi didn't reach for the box. "May I ask what's inside?" Marlowe's expression hardened. "You may not. Just do as you're told." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken threat. Finally, Bondi took the box, which was heavier than it looked. "Yes, ma'am." "Good girl. That's all." Dismissed, Bondi left the dressing room, the silver box like a time bomb in her hands. In the safety of a linen closet, she examined it carefully but didn't open it. Whatever game Marlowe was playing, Bondi refused to be an unwitting pawn. Making a decision, she left the box on a high shelf and activated her phone's recorder. By 8 o'clock, Shadowcrest Manor pulsed with the energy of the ultra-wealthy at play. Laughter and music spilled from the grand ballroom as New York's elite celebrated what exactly? Bondi couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching a performance with a terrible final act. From her position in the service corridor, she watched Bodhi enter the party, surprised initially by the gathering, but quickly assuming the role of gracious host. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, commanding attention without seeming to seek it. For a moment, watching him, Bondi could almost understand why people followed him, invested in his vision, believed in his infallibility. There was something magnetic about Bodhi Jett when he was in his element, a force that demanded recognition. Then she remembered his dismissal of her warning, his casual devaluation of her humanity. And the moment passed. At 8:55, Bondi retrieved the silver box from its hiding place. Whatever this was, she wouldn't play into Marlowe's hands blindly. Instead of heading to Bodhi's office, she found an empty pantry and carefully opened the box. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay Marlowe's diamond necklace, the anniversary gift worth millions, alongside a handwritten note in unfamiliar masculine handwriting. "Can't wait to start our new life together, just as we planned." The trap became instantly clear. Plant the necklace in Bondi's possession, discover it missing during the party, accuse the maid of theft. A perfect solution to the problem Bondi represented. Discredit her completely while removing her from Bodhi's household. Quickly, Bondi used her phone to photograph the necklace and note. Then, making a decision that could change everything, she returned the necklace to the box, but pocketed the note, replacing it with a blank piece of paper folded identically. She closed the box and proceeded toward Bondi's office. The hallway outside his sanctum was deserted, the party's sounds distant. Bondi hesitated, hand on the doorknob, aware that every choice now could determine not just her future, but perhaps Bondi's as well. A sound behind her made her turn. Marlowe stood at the end of the corridor, champagne flute in hand, watching. Right on time. Good. Bondi felt her pulse quicken. I was just about to deliver the package as requested. There's been a change of plans. Marlowe advanced slowly, her emerald gown, not the sapphires after all, whispering against the marble floor. Give me the box. Reluctantly, Bondi handed it over. Marlowe smiled. You know, I've been watching you, Bondi. Your little investigation. Your pathetic attempts to warn my husband. She laughed softly. Did you really think someone like you could interfere with my plans? I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Jett. Of course you do. You've been gathering evidence, haven't you? Recording conversations? Taking photographs? Marlowe's smile never wavered. So industrious. So predictable. Fear curled through Bondi's stomach. I've done nothing wrong. Theft is wrong, and I'm afraid that's exactly what you've done. Marlowe opened the box, her expression transforming to theatrical shock. My necklace! How dare you! What? I didn't... Security! Marlowe's scream shattered the corridor's silence. Security! Thief! Within seconds, the private security team that patrolled Shadowcrest converged on them. Behind them came Bondi, his expression thunderous. What's happening? He demanded. Marlowe clutched the open box, tears expertly deployed. She stole my anniversary necklace, the one you gave me. I caught her trying to hide it in your office. Bondi's gaze locked onto Bondi, cold and unforgiving. Is this true? No, sir. Mrs. Jett asked me to deliver that box to your office. I didn't know what was inside until... Liar! Marlowe shrieked. She's been obsessed with my jewelry for months. Always hovering, always watching. Check her pockets, check her phone. She's probably been planning this for weeks. One of the security guards stepped forward. Miss, please empty your pockets. Bondi complied, heart sinking as she produced her phone with its damning photographs and the note she had removed from the box. Evidence that would now be used against her. Bondi took the phone, his face hardening as he swiped through the images. You photographed my wife's jewelry, and this note. He unfolded the paper, his expression darkening further as he read. That's not what it looks like, Bondi began. It looks like theft and blackmail. Bondi cut her off. It looks like you planned to steal the necklace and use this note to extort money from my wife. No! She planted that necklace. She's been planning something against you. I tried to tell you days ago. She's working with someone to undermine your business, to steal from you. Enough! Bondi's voice cracked like a whip. I will not stand here and listen to these desperate lies. Marlowe pressed herself against Bondi's side, the perfect picture of a wronged woman seeking protection. She's unstable, darling. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want to cause trouble. Last week I caught her trying on my clothes when she thought no one was home. The accusation was so absurd that Bondi almost laughed. That never happened! Mr. Jett, please listen. Get her out of my house, Bondi ordered the security team, and call the police. Terror gripped Bondi. An arrest, a criminal record, she would lose everything. Her job, her ability to support her mother, perhaps even her freedom. Please, she begged, her composure finally cracking. My mother is sick. She needs me. I would never steal from you. I was trying to help you. For a heartbeat, something flickered in Bodhi's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or the faintest recognition of her humanity. But then Marlowe whispered something in his ear, and the moment passed. "Take her things from the staff quarters and escort her off the property," he commanded. "If I ever see you here again, I'll have you arrested." The security guards gripped Bondi's arms, leading her away as party guests watched with avid curiosity. The public humiliation burned almost as much as the injustice. As they passed through the kitchen, Verena pressed Bondi's coat and bag into her hands, her eyes communicating silent sympathy. Outside, the November air bit through Bondi's thin uniform as the guards marched her to the estate's gates. One of them, older than the others, spoke quietly. "For what it's worth, I don't believe you did this. Mrs. Jett has a reputation among the staff." Bondi looked back at Shadowcrest Manor, its windows blazing with light, the sounds of celebration continuing unabated. He'll realize the truth eventually. But by then, it might be too late. The guard nodded grimly. "For him, maybe. But what about you?" Bondi straightened her shoulders, dignity returning even in defeat. "I'll survive. I always do." As the gates closed behind her, Bondi pulled out her phone with trembling hands. Her photo evidence was gone, deleted during the confrontation. But they hadn't found her cloud account with its weeks of accumulated recordings and notes. The truth remained safe, even if her future did not. She began the long walk to the train station, each step taking her further from the glittering prison of Shadowcrest Manor. Behind her, storm clouds gathered over the estate, a perfect metaphor for what awaited Bodhi Jett, a man too blinded by privilege to see the tempest about to engulf him. And when it did, Bondi wondered, who would be left to throw him a lifeline? The thought should have brought satisfaction. Instead, as the first heavy raindrops began to fall, Bondi felt an inexplicable ache for what could have been, a warning heeded, a disaster averted, a connection forged across the vast divide of their worlds. But some storms must break before the air can clear, and some hearts must shatter before they can truly open. Chapter 4. Empire's Fall. 2 weeks after Bondi's humiliating dismissal from Shadowcrest Manor, Bodhi Jett stood in his office at Onyx Tower, staring at documents that couldn't possibly be real. Outside his window, Manhattan glittered in December sunshine, oblivious to the earthquake rippling through his world. "Explain this again," he demanded, voice dangerously quiet. His chief legal counsel, Elias Winton, shifted uncomfortably. At 62, Elias had navigated Jett Enterprises through decades of complex negotiations and occasional legal troubles. But he'd never seen fear in Bodhi Jett's eyes until today. "The Singapore properties have been transferred to Obelisk Holdings," Elias repeated, "a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The transfer documents bear your signature. I never signed these. The signatures have been verified by 3 separate experts. They're authentic, Bodhi." Bodhi slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. "That's impossible. I would never authorize this transfer. These properties are worth 800 million conservatively," Elias finished. "And that's just the beginning. The Dubai development, the Tokyo acquisition, all transferred to various shell companies within the past month." Ice spread through Bodhi's veins. "Who controls these shell companies?" Elias hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. On paper, you do." "What?" "The beneficial ownership traces back to you through a labyrinth of entities. But the operational control, the people actually making decisions, they're hidden behind layers of legal structures designed to be impenetrable." Bodhi sank into his chair, mind racing. "This is corporate theft, fraud. We need to contact the authorities immediately." "That's inadvisable at present." Elias placed another document before him. This was filed with the SEC this morning. The document blurred before Bodhi's eyes. Allegations of securities fraud, tax evasion and money laundering, all implicating him personally. A meticulous paper trail suggested he had orchestrated a massive fraud spanning 5 years and 3 continents. "This is insane," Bodhi whispered. "I'm being set up." "Possibly," Elias conceded, "but whoever did this had intimate knowledge of your business operations, access to your financial records, and apparently your signature." The pieces clicked into terrible alignment. "Marlowe. I can't speculate on—" "It's Marlowe," Bodhi cut him off. "She's been different lately. Secretive, always on her phone." He remembered something else. A young woman's voice trying to warn him, dismissed with contemptuous ease. "The maid tried to tell me weeks ago." His phone buzzed with an incoming call, his broker. With mounting dread, Bodhi answered. "I can't stop it," the broker said without preamble. "Jet Enterprises stock is in freefall, down 68% since the market opened. The trading algorithms triggered a sell-off when the SEC filing hit the news." "Buy everything you can," Bodhi ordered. "Use my personal accounts." "That's just it. Your accounts are frozen, all of them. Some kind of federal hold." The room seemed to tilt beneath him. "How is that possible?" "I don't know, but it's not just the brokerage accounts. Your banks are reporting the same thing." After ending the call, Bodhi sat motionless, absorbing the impossible reality. In less than a day, he had lost control of his company, access to his wealth, and potentially his freedom. "We need to prepare for the worst," Elias said grimly. "The FBI could be here any moment." As if summoned by the words, Bodhi's assistant burst through the door, face ashen. "Sir, there are federal agents in the lobby with a search warrant. And, sir, the news—" She grabbed a remote, turning on the wall-mounted television. Every financial network carried the same story. Jet Enterprises under federal investigation. Founder accused of massive fraud. Bodhi watched in numb disbelief as talking heads dissected his apparent downfall with barely concealed glee. Then the coverage shifted to footage of Marlowe, his wife, emerging from their attorney's office. "I'm devastated by these revelations," she told reporters, eyes appropriately tearful behind oversized sunglasses. "I filed for divorce this morning. I had no knowledge of my husband's illegal activities." "Liar," Bodhi whispered. The camera followed Marlowe to a waiting car where a man held the door, the same man Bondi had described meeting with Marlowe at the estate. As the car pulled away, Marlowe's mask slipped for just a moment, her expression shifting from devastation to cold satisfaction. 8 hours later, after a humiliating search of his offices and a preliminary interview with federal investigators, Bodhi returned to Shadowcrest Manor to find the gates locked against him. His security codes had been changed. His staff, people who had served him for years, watched from windows but made no move to admit him. Through the ornate iron gates, he could see moving trucks in the circular driveway. Men carried priceless artworks and antiques to waiting vehicles. His phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Jet," came a smooth voice. "This is Xavier Thorne, Mrs. Jet's attorney. I'm calling to inform you that the court has granted my client exclusive use of the marital residence pending divorce proceedings. Additionally, a restraining order has been issued prohibiting you from approaching within 100 yards of Mrs. Jet or the property." "She's looting my house," Bodhi snarled. "Mrs. Jet is merely securing her personal possessions, as is her legal right. Given the severity of the allegations against you, the court was quite sympathetic to her concerns about asset dissipation." "This is my home." "Not anymore, Mr. Jet. I suggest you find alternative accommodations and retain counsel immediately. Good day." The line went dead, leaving Bodhi standing in the cold, locked out of his own life. By evening, the full scope of his destruction had become clear. Every property, every account, every asset had been either frozen by authorities, transferred to shell companies, or claimed by Marlowe in her divorce filing. His credit cards were declined. His professional contacts stopped answering his calls. Long-standing dinner reservations were suddenly unavailable. New York's elite, who had celebrated in his home just 2 weeks earlier, now treated him like a contagious disease. Body checked into an anonymous hotel using cash from his wallet, the last of his accessible funds. In the impersonal room, he poured himself a scotch from the minibar and turned on the television, masochistically tuning to a financial news channel. Downfall of Bodhi Jet continues to send shockwaves through Wall Street, an anchor was saying. Sources close to the federal investigation suggest evidence of fraud dating back nearly a decade. The screen shifted to a legal analyst. If these allegations prove true, we're looking at potential sentences exceeding 30 years. This could be the largest case of white-collar crime since Bernie Madoff. Body shut off the television and moved to the window, staring out at the city he had once ruled. Lights glittered in the darkness, buildings he had designed or financed, standing like monuments to a life now destroyed. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I warned you. You should have listened. B. Bondi," the maid who had tried to save him from himself. His finger hovered over the reply button, but pride held him back. What could he possibly say to her now? That she was right? That he should have listened? That he regretted treating her like she was invisible? All true, but all too late. Days passed in a blur of meetings with increasingly pessimistic attorneys, interviews with increasingly hostile federal agents, and nights of increasingly destructive solitude. Body moved from hotel to hotel, each one less prestigious than the last, as his remaining cash dwindled. The media continued its feeding frenzy. Old rivals emerged from the woodwork to share stories of his arrogance and cutthroat business tactics. Former employees sold tell-all interviews painting him as a modern-day tyrant. Even his charitable donations were recast as tax evasion strategies. A man who had spent decades crafting his image watched helplessly as it was systematically dismantled. On the 10th day of his downfall, Bodhi received a call from his lead attorney. "They're offering a deal," Howard Gable informed him without preamble. "What kind of deal?" "Plead guilty to reduced charges, surrender all remaining assets, serve 5 to 7 years in a minimum security facility." Body gripped the phone tighter. "I'm innocent." "Legally speaking, that's debatable. Your signature is on those documents." "They're forgeries." "Perhaps, but proving that would require resources we no longer have. Your legal fund is depleted, Bodhi. I can't continue representation without payment." The abandonment cut deep, but didn't surprise him. Howard had been sending subtle signals for days, cancelled meetings, unreturned calls, increasingly perfunctory updates. "So that's it? You're quitting?" "I prefer to think of it as a strategic withdrawal. My advice? Take the deal. It's the best you're going to get." After the call ended, Bodhi sat on the edge of the bed in his latest temporary residence, a shabby room in a hotel that would once have horrified him. The minibar had been emptied days ago. His expensive suit was rumpled from repeated wear. His phone contained nothing but rejections and accusations. He was alone in a way he had never experienced before, not just physically isolated, but utterly abandoned by the world he had dominated for so long. The hotel room door had a deadbolt, but it offered little security against the despair seeping through the cracks. Body found himself staring at the amber contents of a whiskey bottle, his last companion in this new, diminished life. 3 weeks ago he had been untouchable. Wealth, power, respect, all his by divine right, or so he had believed. Now he understood the brutal truth. Everything he valued had been built on sand, and the tide had come in with merciless force. As night deepened outside his window, Bodhi surrendered to the whiskey's embrace, seeking oblivion from a reality too painful to face sober. Bottle in hand, he moved aimlessly through the small room, a caged animal in a zoo of his own making. On the bedside table lay a newspaper with his face on the front page. Hollow-eyed, unshaven, captured by paparazzi as he left his attorney's office. The headline screamed, "Jet's Final Descent." With sudden fury, he hurled the whiskey bottle against the wall, watching it shatter in a spray of glass and alcohol. The momentary release did nothing to ease the crushing weight in his chest. For the first time in his adult life, Bodhi Jet felt truly powerless. Not just financially ruined or professionally disgraced, but fundamentally lost. A man without identity, without purpose, without a single hand reaching out to break his fall. In that moment of absolute desolation, his mind returned to the young woman who had tried to warn him. The maid he had dismissed so casually, whose humanity he had refused to acknowledge until it was too late. Bondi Gala had seen the truth when he was blind to it, had offered help when he deserved none, had shown more integrity in her poverty than he had in all his wealth. The irony was almost too perfect. The invisible servant had been the only one who truly saw him, while those he considered peers had been deceiving him all along. Body sank to the floor, back against the wall, head in his hands. Pride had been his armor for so long that he didn't know how to live without it. Now, stripped of everything that defined him, he faced the most terrifying question of all. Who was Bodhi Jet when the empire fell away? The answer, reflected in the shards of broken glass surrounding him, was unbearable. He was nothing, no one, a cautionary tale for the next generation of ambitious men. Outside his window, New York continued its restless pulse, indifferent to his destruction. Somewhere in that vast city was Marlowe, celebrating her victory with his wealth. Somewhere was Bondi, perhaps watching his downfall with justified satisfaction. And somewhere, though he couldn't yet imagine it, was a path forward through the ruins of his former life. But finding it would require something Bodhi had never truly given anyone: trust. As the winter night deepened around his solitary figure, one truth emerged from the wreckage of his certainties. Rock bottom was not a place, but a beginning. The question was whether he could find the courage to start again, not as the man he had been, but as the man he might yet become. Chapter 5. Rock bottom. January arrived with merciless cold, matching the frozen wasteland of Bodhi Jet's existence. 6 weeks after his world imploded, he found himself living in the only property Marlowe hadn't managed to seize. The neglected guest house at the edge of the Shadowcrest estate, a structure so insignificant it had been overlooked in the legal proceedings. The irony wasn't lost on him. Once master of a 12-acre estate, he now occupied its forgotten afterthought: a single bedroom, a kitchenette, and a living area, all falling into disrepair. From his small window, he could see Shadowcrest Manor illuminated at night, music and laughter occasionally drifting across the grounds as Marlowe entertained with his money in his home. This particular evening, Bodhi sat in semi-darkness, a half-empty bottle of bourbon his only company. The electricity had been shut off 3 days ago. The heat followed a day later. Now he survived on bottled water, canned food, and the burning in his throat that momentarily distracted from the cold. His reflection in the window glass was a stranger's, gaunt, unshaven, hollow-eyed. The $5,000 suits had given way to worn jeans and a sweater with holes at the elbows. His once precise haircut had grown shaggy and dull. Even his posture, once commanding, had collapsed into itself. His phone, the last vestige of his former life, lay dark on the table. The service had been disconnected when the bill went unpaid. It served now only as a grim timekeeper, its battery conserved for one check each day. Today's news had been the worst yet. The federal investigation had expanded to include tax evasion across multiple jurisdictions. His former CFO had taken an immunity deal, agreeing to testify against him. And Marlowe, his wife, his betrayer, had been photographed in St. Bart's with her lover, draped in jewels that had once been family heirlooms. The bourbon no longer burned going down, no longer provided even temporary escape. Body stared at the amber liquid, as if it might hold answers to questions he couldn't properly formulate. How had he not seen it coming? How had he been so easily deceived? How had he fallen so far, so fast? And deeper still, who was he now without the trappings of success? What remained when everything external was stripped away? The bottle offered no answers, only oblivion. Body reached for it with trembling hands. The movement sent pain shooting through his side, hunger pangs, perhaps, or something more serious. He hadn't eaten properly in days. Outside, snow began to fall, delicate flakes illuminated by the distant glow of Shadowcrest. Body watched it accumulate on the window ledge, oddly mesmerized. The temperature in the small house dropped further. His breath formed clouds in the dim light. His thoughts drifted to unlikely places. To Bondi Gala, the maid he had wronged. Where was she now? Had she found another position? Was she caring for her sick mother? Had she watched his downfall with satisfaction? He wouldn't blame her if she had. He deserved no sympathy, no second chances. He had lived his entire life treating people as tools, as stepping stones, as furniture in the grand mansion of his ambition. The realization came with startling clarity. His loneliness now was not new. He had always been alone, even surrounded by people. He had never truly connected, never truly seen others as fully human, especially not her. Not Bondi, with her quiet dignity and her warnings, he had dismissed. The bourbon bottle was empty now. Body let it slip from his fingers to the floor. Standing was an effort that required concentration. The room spun slightly, whether from alcohol or hunger or despair, he couldn't tell. He needed air, needed to escape the suffocating confines of these walls that reminded him hourly of how far he had fallen. Outside, the snow fell harder, coating the world in deceptive beauty. Body stumbled down the path that led toward the main estate, his expensive Italian loafers, the last pair he owned, inadequate against the cold and wet. He had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to move, to feel something beyond the numbing despair that had become his constant companion. The lights of Shadowcrest Manor grew closer. Music drifted through the night, a party in full swing. Body stopped at the edge of the formal gardens, swaying slightly as he gazed at what had once been his. Through tall windows, he could see silhouettes moving, dancing, laughing, living as if he had never existed. Something broke inside him then, not with dramatic force, but with the quiet finality of ice cracking on a frozen lake. He had lost everything, his wealth, his status, his identity. But worst of all, he had lost himself long before Marlowe's betrayal. Had become so hollow that when the external trappings fell away, almost nothing remained. The realization drove him to his knees in the snow. Physical pain registered distantly. Cold seeping through his clothes, stomach cramping with hunger, head pounding from too much alcohol and too little food. But these were nothing compared to the stark truth he finally faced. He had built his life on illusions, valued only what could be measured in dollars or power, and now he was paying the price. How long he remained there, he couldn't say. The snow continued to fall, dusting his shoulders and hair with white. The cold penetrated deeper, slowing his thoughts, numbing his extremities. Somewhere in his alcohol-addled mind, a warning sounded, hypothermia, danger, but it seemed unimportant, distant. Darkness edged his vision. The music from the house faded. His last coherent thought was oddly peaceful. Perhaps this was justice. Perhaps this was exactly what he deserved. Then nothing, until a voice, female, familiar, urgent, cut through the darkness. Mr. Jet? My God, Mr. Jet. Hands on his face, checking for pulse, arms struggling to lift him, warmth against the cold. Stay with me. Don't you dare die out here. The voice penetrated the fog in his brain. Bondi. It was Bondi Gala, the woman he had wronged, now trying to save him from his own self-destruction. The irony was the last thing he registered before consciousness slipped away completely. He awakened to warmth and the smell of something cooking. For a moment, disoriented, he thought he was back in his life before, that everything had been a nightmare from which he'd finally awakened. Then pain reasserted itself, in his head, his stomach, his frost-nipped fingers and toes. Reality returned with cruel clarity. He was lying on a sofa in the guest house, wrapped in blankets, a small space heater humming nearby. And Bondi Gala was watching him from a chair across the room. "You're awake," she said simply. Bondi struggled to sit up, wincing at the effort. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your life, apparently." Her tone was neutral, neither kind nor cruel. "You were unconscious in the snow. Another hour and you would have died of exposure." He couldn't process her presence. "Why would you help me?" Bondi studied him for a long moment. "I've been asking myself the same question." She stood and moved to the kitchenette, returning with a mug of something hot. "Drink this. It's just broth, but you need to start slowly. You're malnourished and dehydrated on top of the hypothermia." Bondi accepted the mug with shaking hands, nearly spilling it before Bondi steadied his grip. The broth was simple, but awakened hunger he'd been ignoring for days. "Why are you here?" he asked again after drinking half the contents. "I came to check on my mother's medical records. They were still in my room at the staff quarters." She paused. "I saw lights in the guest house. Curiosity, I suppose. You could have left me there. After what I did to you." "Yes," she agreed. "I could have." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken accusations and regrets. "You were right," Bondi finally said, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. "About everything. Marlowe, the business, all of it." "I know." Another silence. "I'm sorry," he managed, the apology inadequate against the magnitude of his wrongs. Bondi's expression remained unreadable. "Your wife took everything?" "Everything that mattered to me, then." He attempted a smile that emerged as a grimace. "Turns out that's not the same as everything that matters." She nodded, seeming to understand the distinction. "You need medical attention and food, real food. I don't have money for doctors, or food for that matter." Bondi reached for her phone. "I know someone who can help. A doctor who owes me a favor." Bondi watched her make the call, struck by the bizarre reversal of their situations. The maid he had once considered beneath his notice was now his lifeline. "Why?" he asked when she ended the call. "After everything, why help me?" Bondi looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes holding wisdom beyond her years. "Because we're all one misfortune away from needing someone's mercy," she said simply. "And right now, you need mine." The truth of it, the humbling, transformative truth, struck Bondi with the force of revelation. In his darkest hour, when everyone who had claimed to care for him had vanished, it was Bondi Gala, the woman he had disrespected, disbelieved and discarded, who offered him the dignity he had never afforded her. "The doctor will be here in 20 minutes, she said, moving toward the kitchenette again. "I'll make you something more substantial to eat. Then we'll talk about what happens next. What happens next." The words hung in the air, offering something Bondi had thought lost forever. A future. Chapter 6. The Hand That Heals. Malnutrition, mild hypothermia, liver inflammation from excessive alcohol, and exhaustion verging on collapse. Dr. Leona Phillips snapped her medical bag closed, eyes sharp with judgment as she addressed Bondi. If you hadn't found him when you did, he might not have survived the night. Bondi lay on the sofa, too weak to protest the clinical assessment of his deterioration. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with grey-streaked braids and hands gentle despite her stern demeanour, had arrived quickly and worked efficiently. "He needs proper medical care," Dr. Phillips continued. "Fluids, nutrition, monitoring." "I can't go to a hospital," Bodhi interjected. "I don't have insurance anymore, or money." The doctor's expression was unimpressed. "Then you'd better follow my instructions precisely." She turned to Bondi. "I've left medication and a treatment plan. He needs small, frequent meals, limited alcohol, preferably none, and someone should check on him regularly." Bondi nodded, her face revealing nothing of her thoughts. After the doctor left, silence filled the small guest house. Bodhi watched as Bondi organized the medications, her movements precise and purposeful. The roles of their previous life had inverted completely. Now she was in control, competent and commanding, while he lay helpless and dependent. "You don't have to stay," he said finally. "You've done more than enough." Bondi paused, considering him with those perceptive eyes that had once tried to warn him of disaster. "Can you get up on your own?" He attempted to rise from the sofa and immediately fell back, dizzy and weak. "That's what I thought." She returned to her task. "I'll stay until you're stable. After that, you're on your own." The next days passed in a haze of sleep, medication, and gradual strengthening. Bondi appeared each morning and evening, bringing food, changing linens, administering medicine with professional detachment. During her absences, Bodhi had nothing but time to think, to remember, to regret. On the fourth day, when she arrived with groceries, he finally asked the question that had been haunting him. "What happened to your mother?" Bondi stilled, a tin of soup halfway to the shelf. "She died 3 weeks after you fired me." The words hit like physical blows. "I'm sorry." "For what? My mother's death? Or for destroying my ability to care for her in her final weeks?" The accusation hung in the air between them, justified and unanswerable. "Both," he said finally. "Everything." She put the groceries away in silence, her back to him. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled but raw with emotion. "I lost my job because of your accusation. No references, a theft allegation. I couldn't find work. The experimental treatment my mother needed was out of reach. I had to move her to a state facility where they did the minimum while I worked 3 part-time jobs." She turned to face him. "She died alone because I was working a night shift cleaning offices. I wasn't there to hold her hand." Shame crashed over Bodhi in suffocating waves. What could he possibly say in the face of such harm? His careless cruelty had cost this woman the final moments with her dying mother. "Why are you helping me?" The question emerged as a whisper. "After what I did to you." Bondi met his gaze directly. "Because I refused to become what was done to me." The simple dignity of her answer revealed the vast gulf between them, not of wealth or status, but of character, of humanity. That night, fever gripped Bodhi. He thrashed on the sofa, caught between nightmares and memories. Marlowe's betrayal, his empire's collapse, Bondi's dismissal, faces of people he had used and discarded throughout his life. Through the delirium, he was aware of Bondi's presence, cool cloths on his forehead, quiet words of reassurance, steady hands guiding medication and water past his parched lips. In his fevered state, barriers fell, words tumbled out unfiltered. "I was nothing before the money," he confessed to the darkness. "Poor kid from nowhere, changed my name, invented a new past, thought wealth made me real." "Shh," Bondi murmured. "Save your strength." But the confessions continued through the night. Admissions of fraud early in his career, of relationships destroyed for profit, of the hollow victories that had defined his existence. "I never saw people," he whispered as dawn approached, "only uses for them, only what they could do for me." Bondi's hand paused in replacing the cool cloth. "And now?" "Now I see you," he said, clarity breaking through the fever. "I see you, Bondi Gala." Morning found him weakened but lucid, the fever broken. Bondi sat in a chair nearby, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. She had stayed all night, watching over him. "You should have let me die," he said quietly. "That would have been easier," she agreed. "For both of us." "Why didn't you?" Bondi looked away toward the window where morning light filtered through thin curtains. "My mother believed everyone deserves a chance at redemption. Even you, Mr. Jet." "Body," he corrected. "Please, after everything, at least call me by my name." She nodded slightly. "Body." That afternoon, as Bondi prepared to leave, Bodhi noticed something missing from her hand. "Your mother's earrings," he said. "The silver ones with the blue stones. You always wore one." He remembered this detail with surprising clarity, how one earring would occasionally catch the light as she worked at Shadowcrest. Bondi's face tightened. "I had to sell them, for medicine in the end." "I'm sorry," he said again, the words increasingly inadequate against the scope of her losses. "They were just things." They were more than that." She shrugged, a gesture that tried to minimize pain he could now recognize. "I need to go. I have a shift at the diner at 4. "You're working at a diner, and a convenience store, and weekend shifts at a nursing home." Her tone was matter-of-fact. "The rent doesn't pay itself." As she gathered her things, Body struggled to articulate the transformation occurring within him, how her quiet strength and dignity were reshaping his understanding of value, of worth, of what it meant to be truly wealthy. "Bondi," he said as she reached the door, "I don't deserve your help, but I'm grateful for it." She paused, hand on the doorknob. "Everyone deserves help, Bodhi. Even people who never offered it to others." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Especially them, perhaps." After she left, Bodhi found himself contemplating her words. Everyone deserves help. The concept was foreign to his previous worldview, where people earned assistance through utility or connection. The idea of help freely given, without expectation of return, challenged everything he had believed about human interactions. By evening, he was strong enough to move around the small house unassisted. In the kitchenette, he found evidence of Bondi's care. Meals prepared and labeled with simple instructions, medications arranged by time of day, a new space heater installed to combat the February chill. On the counter lay an envelope. Inside was $500 in cash and a note. "For groceries and utilities, pay me back when you can." The money represented significant sacrifice for someone working 3 minimum-wage jobs. Yet she had given it without hesitation, without fanfare, without using it to demonstrate superiority, as he surely would have done in her position. When Bondi returned the next morning, Bodhi was sitting at the small table, a notepad before him covered with neat columns of numbers. "What's this?" she asked, setting down a grocery bag. "A repayment plan," he answered. "For everything, the money, the medication, your time." He hesitated. "And compensation. For what happened to your mother?" Bondi's expression darkened. "My mother's death isn't something you can settle with a payment plan." "I know. Nothing could be adequate." He pushed the notepad aside. "But I need to try to make amends. Somehow." She regarded him for a long moment. "You really have lost everything, haven't you?" "Yes." Then, with dawning realization, "No. I've lost what I had, but I'm finding something else." "What?" "Perspective. Humility." He met her gaze directly. "Humanity." Bondi crossed her arms, unconvinced. "Pretty words. But real change takes more than an epiphany, Body. It takes sustained effort, consistent choices. daily recommitment to being different than you were. Teach me, he said simply. The request hung between them, sincere, vulnerable, unprecedented. I'm not your redemption project, she said carefully. Number, but you might be my teacher, if you're willing. Bondi's phone alarm sounded, breaking the moment. I have to go. Double shift today. As she turned to leave, Bodhi made a decision. When you come tomorrow, if you come tomorrow, I want to tell you something. About evidence that might help me fight back against Marlowe, against what she's done. Bondi paused at the door. What evidence? Tomorrow, he said. Please. After she left, Bodhi returned to the sofa, physically stronger but emotionally raw. The man he had been would have viewed Bondi's help as weakness to exploit, her kindness as naivety to manipulate. That man was dying, breath by painful breath, replaced by someone new, someone who recognized the extraordinary strength required to help an enemy, the profound wealth in a spirit unbroken by adversity. As evening shadows lengthened across the small room, Bodhi faced the truth that had been waiting for him at the bottom of his fall. His redemption, if it came at all, would not be found in reclaiming his empire or punishing Marlowe. It would be found in becoming worthy of the second chance that had arrived in the most unexpected form, the outstretched hand of a woman who had every reason to let him fall, yet chose to help him rise. And in that choice lay a kind of power he had never understood until now. Chapter 7. Awakening. Dawn painted the guest house in watercolor hues of rose and gold when Bondi arrived. She found Bodhi standing at the window, a silhouette against the sunrise, stronger now, but still haunted by shadows of his former self. He had shaved, his hair combed back, wearing the one decent shirt that remained from his previous life. You look better, she said, setting down a paper bag that released the aroma of fresh bread. I feel human again, he replied, turning to face her. Thanks to you. Something in his eyes gave her pause, a clarity that hadn't been there before, as if fever and desperation had burned away a lifetime of pretense, leaving something raw and genuine in their wake. They sat at the small table, morning light casting dappled patterns between them. Steam rose from their coffee cups like unspoken words given form. I have something to tell you, Bondi said finally, her voice quiet but steady. She reached for her phone, unlocking it with practiced motions. Something I've been keeping. What is it? The truth. She placed the phone between them, open to a cloud storage account. All of it. Bondi stared at the screen. Dozens of audio files, photographs, transcribed conversations, all meticulously labeled and dated. I don't understand. After you dismissed my warning, I started documenting everything. Marlowe's conversations, her meetings with that man, Julian Voss, I learned later, photos of documents I found while cleaning. Bondi's fingers hovered over the screen, evidence of what they were planning. You recorded them? Disbelief colored his voice. At first, for protection, I knew they suspected I'd overheard too much. Her eyes met his, unflinching. Later, because someone needed to bear witness to the truth. Bodhi's hand trembled slightly as he touched the screen, scrolling through the evidence of his own destruction and his possible salvation. Even after what I did to you, after your mother. Truth doesn't change based on how I felt about you, Bondi said simply. What they did was wrong. What you did to me was wrong too, but separate. Morning light caught the curve of her cheek, illuminating strength that had been forged in fire. Bodhi saw her then, truly saw her, not as the invisible woman who had once moved through his home, but as a singular soul whose moral clarity outshone his greatest achievements. This could prove everything, he whispered. Show that I was set up, that Marlowe orchestrated it all. It might, she agreed, with the right lawyer, the right strategy. I don't have either anymore. Bondi's eyes reflected consideration. I might know someone. Valencia Torres. She worked pro bono on my mother's case through community legal aid. Brilliant, but overlooked because she chose to help people who can't afford justice. Hope unfurled in Bodhi's chest, not the entitled expectation of his former life, but something tender and fragile, like the first green shoot after winter's devastation. "Why would you help me fight this battle?" he asked, the question emerging from the deepest part of him. "After everything, what could possibly be in it for you?" Bondi cradled her coffee cup, steam curling around her fingers like memories. "My mother believed that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about restoration, about making things right." Her gaze lifted to his, "And about giving people the chance to become better than they were." "People like me?" The question held no defensiveness now, only genuine inquiry. "People who've never had to see those they considered beneath them," she said gently. "People who confused wealth with worth." Sunlight shifted through the window, painting gold across the table between them. In that light, Bodhi saw the journey before him with sudden clarity. Not a path back to what he had been, but forward to something he had never imagined. "I was that person," he acknowledged. "I'm trying to find my way to being someone else." "I know," she said, and those simple words held more value than all the praise of his former life. Silence bloomed between them, not empty, but full of unspoken recognition, of change beginning, of walls coming down, stone by painful stone. "There's something I've wondered," Bodhi said finally. "Why did you come back to Shadowcrest that night, after everything that happened?" Pain flickered across Bondi's features, swift, deep, controlled. "My mother's things, her medical records, the jewelry box with her wedding ring, our family photographs." She looked away. "When Marlowe accused me, I had to leave everything behind. I thought enough time had passed that I could retrieve them quietly." "Did you find them?" My room had been cleared out. Everything was gone." Her voice remained steady, but Bodhi could see the cost of that control. The last tangible connections to her just erased. The weight of that loss, another consequence of his blindness, pressed against Bodhi's heart. "I'm sorry" seemed painfully inadequate, yet he offered it anyway, knowing it was just the beginning. "I know you are," Bondi replied, "but sorry is just the first step on a much longer journey." "What comes after sorry?" "Change," she said simply. "Restitution where possible, and becoming someone who would never cause that same harm again." Her moral clarity cut through years of self-deception. This woman who had once been invisible to him now illuminated truths he had spent a lifetime avoiding. "I want to be that person," he said quietly, "to become someone worthy of the chance you've given me." Bondi nodded, then glanced at her watch. "I need to go. Night shift at the convenience store." As she gathered her coat, something crystallized in Bodhi's consciousness. A memory, a connection, a truth long buried. "Bondi," he called as she reached the door, "we have dark skin but not dark hearts." She turned slowly, eyes widening. "What did you say?" "Something my mother used to tell me. Before she died." The memory surfaced from childhood, preserved like amber. "I'd forgotten until now, until you showed me what it means to have light in your heart despite darkness all around." For the first time since she had rescued him from the snow, a genuine smile transformed Bondi's face, brief but radiant, revealing the extraordinary beauty of her spirit. "My mother said the same thing," she whispered. Her mother before her. In that moment, something invisible but profound unfurled between them, a recognition of shared humanity that transcended their past roles, their differences, their separate journeys to this unexpected intersection. After she left, Bodhi remained at the table while morning light shifted to afternoon gold. The evidence she had entrusted to him represented possibility of clearing his name, of reclaiming some portion of his former life. But something more valuable had been exchanged between them. As evening shadows lengthened across the small room, Bodhi confronted the truth he could no longer deny. He was falling in love with her, not with desperate gratitude or convenient infatuation, but with genuine recognition of her extraordinary being. Her intelligence, her compassion, her unwavering integrity. The man he had been would have seen such feelings as weakness or opportunity, but the man he was becoming understood them as the most precious wealth he had ever possessed. Whether Bondi could ever return such feelings remained uncertain. Whether she should was even less clear. But with each sunrise they shared, each honest conversation, each moment of genuine connection, something new awakened between them. Not the hollow transactions of his past, but something authentic, something true, something worth more than all he had lost and all he might regain. Chapter 8. Unexpected Proposal. Valencia Torres arrived like a storm in human form, 5 feet of fierce intelligence wrapped in a well-worn suit that had seen 100 courtrooms. She surveyed the guest house with quick, assessing eyes that missed nothing before settling her attention on Bodhi. "So, you're the fallen titan," she said, her voice carrying the musical inflections of her Puerto Rican heritage. "Not what I expected." Bondi made introductions, her quiet dignity a counterpoint to Valencia's electric energy. "Valencia was the only lawyer who took my mother's case when the hospital denied her treatment, and now you want me to help the man who caused that situation." Valencia raised an eyebrow at Bondi. "Interesting choice." Bondi flinched at the direct confrontation of his culpability. In his former life he would have bristled at such accusation. Now he recognized it as simple truth. "I understand your reluctance," he said quietly. "In your position, I wouldn't help me either." Valencia studied him with practiced discernment, reading the changes grief and humility had etched into his features. "Let's see this evidence before I make any decisions." For the next hour, they reviewed Bondi's meticulous documentation. Valencia asked sharp questions, took precise notes, occasionally muttering legal terms under her breath. When they finished, she sat back, fingers steepled beneath her chin. "This is compelling," she admitted. "Not definitive, but enough to potentially reopen investigation into who actually orchestrated the fraud." Her gaze fixed on Bodhi. "But legal battles require resources, even working at reduced rates. I'd need filing fees, forensic accountants, investigators." "I understand," Bodhi said, the familiar weight of powerlessness settling over him. "I don't have resources anymore." "What about contingency?" Bondi suggested. "If you win, you get a percentage of what's recovered." Valencia laughed softly. "Contingency against Marlowe Jett and her lover Julian Voss? They've hired Blackwood and Stern, the sharks who eat other sharks for breakfast." She gathered her notes with brisk efficiency. "I'll think about it. That's all I can offer right now." After Valencia left, silence filled the small room. Spring sunshine spilled through windows Bodhi had recently cleaned, one of many small tasks he'd undertaken to maintain the guest house and to feel useful again. "Thank you," he said finally, "for trying." Bondi moved to the kitchenette, filling the kettle with practiced motions. "She'll help. Valencia doesn't show it, but your situation bothers her sense of justice. Even if she takes the case, the odds are overwhelming." Bodhi ran a hand through his hair, now neatly trimmed, thanks to Bondi's careful assistance the day before. "Marlowe has everything. My resources, my connections, high-powered attorneys." "You have the truth," Bondi replied simply. "Is that enough?" Her eyes met his, steady and certain. "It has to be." As she prepared tea, Bodhi watched her, the graceful economy of her movements, the quiet, strength in the set of her shoulders. 2 months had passed since she'd found him in the snow, 2 months of healing, of conversations that stretched until dawn, of slowly rebuilding not what he had lost, but something entirely new. He had learned more about her in those months than he had bothered to discover about anyone in his previous life. How she loved Gabriel Garcia Marquez and could quote entire passages from memory. How she had been studying nursing before her mother's illness forced her to leave school. How she could identify constellations and name the stars within them. And she had seen him, truly seen him, at his most broken, his most vulnerable, his most honest. Had witnessed his struggle to reconcile who he had been with, who he might become. "Bondi," he said as she placed the tea before him. "Why do you keep coming back here?" The question had haunted him for weeks. She had her own life, her own struggles, her own path that had been interrupted by his needs. She considered him thoughtfully, steam rising between them like unspoken possibilities. "At first, because you needed help, and I couldn't walk away, even from you." A slight smile touched her lips. "Now, because I see something in you worth staying for." The words sent warmth through his chest. "Even after everything?" "Not despite what happened," she clarified. "Because of how you faced it, how you're changing through it." Their eyes held across the small table, a moment of perfect understanding, of recognition that transcended their pasts. "There's something I need to tell you," Bodhi said, his heart accelerating. "Something I've realized over these weeks." "What is it?" The words he had rehearsed 100 times in his mind suddenly seemed inadequate, presumptuous even. How could he express feelings that had no right to exist? How could he deserve her after everything? "I find myself thinking about you," he began carefully, "not just with gratitude, though I'm eternally grateful, but with admiration, with ... He hesitated, then committed to honesty. "With love." The word hung between them, fragile, enormous, transformative. Bondi's expression revealed surprise, then something more complex. "Body, please," he interrupted gently. "I don't expect anything. I have no right to. I just needed you to know that you've become everything. The reason I want to be better. The reason I believe I can be." Sunlight caught the unshed tears in her eyes, turning them to amber. "You don't need me to be better. That journey is yours alone." "I know, but you showed me the path." She looked down at her tea, gathering thoughts. When she met his gaze again, her expression was gentle but resolute. "What you're feeling, it might not be love, Bodhi. It might be dependency, gratitude, projection." Her voice held no judgment, only compassion. "You're rebuilding your entire identity. It's natural to attach those feelings to the person who's been present through that process." The wisdom in her words both stung and soothed. "You think I don't know my own heart? I think neither of us can be certain what's real and what's circumstance." She reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching his, their first deliberate contact beyond the necessities of caregiving. "Real love requires equality, and right now our situation is anything but equal." The touch of her hand sent electricity through him. Desire, yes, but also understanding. She was right, as she so often was. The imbalance between them couldn't be ignored or wished away. "What if I could change that?" he asked softly. "What if I could restore some balance between us?" "How?" The idea had been forming for days, crystallizing now into certainty. "A proposal. Not of marriage, I wouldn't presume, but of partnership." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "What kind of partnership?" "If Valencia takes the case and we recover anything, even a fraction of what was stolen, I want half to go to you." He leaned forward, energy infusing his words. "For your education, for a foundation in your mother's name, for whatever future you want to build." Bondi withdrew her hand slowly. "I'm not helping you for money, Body. I know that. This isn't payment. It's justice." He held her gaze steadily. "You lost your chance at education, your mother's final moments, your security, all because of my blindness. If anything is recovered, half belongs to you by right." For a long moment Bondi said nothing, the proposal hanging between them like a bridge neither was certain would hold their weight. "And if I refuse," she asked finally, "then I donate it all to medical research for conditions like your mother's." His voice softened. "But I hope you'll accept. Not for me, but for the dreams you set aside, for the nurse you wanted to become." Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, consideration, perhaps the first tentative acceptance that their lives might remain connected beyond this period of crisis. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I can offer right now." The echo of Valencia's earlier words brought a smile to Bodhi's lips. "That's more than enough." As afternoon light gilded the small room, casting long shadows that spoke of day's end and evening's beginning, something new blossomed in the space between them, not quite love, not merely friendship, but possibility. The recognition that their unlikely connection might transcend its painful origins to become something neither could have imagined. Bondi rose to leave for her evening shift, gathering her things with practiced efficiency. At the door, she paused, turning back to him with eyes that held questions and answers in equal measure. "Whatever happens with the case, with Marlowe, with everything else," she said quietly, "promise me one thing. Anything. Don't go back to being the man you were, even if you regain everything you lost." The request struck the deepest chord within him, the fear that prosperity might resurrect arrogance, that comfort might breed complacency. "I promise," he said, meaning it more than any vow he had ever made. "That man died in the snow the night you found me. Whatever happens, whoever I become from here, he'll be someone worthy of the chance you've given me." The smile that touched her lips then, tentative but genuine, felt like the first ray of dawn after the longest night. As the door closed behind her, Bodhi stood at the window, watching her walk toward the bus stop that would take her to her evening job. In her determined stride, he saw not just the woman who had saved him, but perhaps the woman who might someday, if he proved worthy, if time and healing allowed, share a future he could not yet fully imagine, but increasingly longed to build. Not the empty grandeur of his past, but something authentic and meaningful, something built on truth, on recognition, on seeing and being truly seen. For the first time since his fall, Bodhi felt not just hope, but purpose, not just gratitude, but possibility, and in that moment, it was enough. Chapter 9. Evidence of Truth. "We have a problem," Valencia announced, striding into the guest house without preamble. 3 weeks had passed since she'd agreed to take Bodhi's case, working on contingency despite the considerable risk. Bodhi looked up from the desk, where he'd been reviewing transcripts of Bondi's recordings. "What kind of problem?" "Bondi's evidence. It's compelling, but technically illegally obtained." Valencia set her briefcase on the table with a decisive thud. "Recording conversations without consent is inadmissible in court." Bondi, who had just arrived for her daily visit, froze in the doorway. "So it's useless. For court, yes, but not for leverage." Valencia's eyes gleamed with strategic calculation. "We can use it to initiate an investigation that gathers admissible evidence." "How?" Bodhi asked. "Anonymous tip to the SEC about specific details only an insider would know. The recordings tell us exactly where to point investigators." Valencia pulled out documents. "But we need more. Something concrete that directly ties Marlowe to the fraud. Bondi set down her bag, brow furrowed in concentration. There was a leather portfolio Marlowe kept locked in her dressing room. I once saw her and Julian reviewing documents from it. Signature pages, offshore accounts. Could it still be at Shadowcrest? Valencia asked. Possibly. Marlowe was always paranoid about digital trails. She preferred paper for anything sensitive. Bondi shook his head. Even if it exists, we can't access it. I'm prohibited from going near the property. I could go, Bondi said quietly. Bondi turned to her, alarm evident. Absolutely not. I wouldn't be trespassing, she explained calmly. I'd be retrieving my mother's belongings. Marlowe never filed official charges against me. It's our only option, Valencia confirmed, and legally she's right. Bondi met Bondi's concerned gaze. I know Shadowcrest better than anyone. The staff routines, the security blind spots, and Marlowe is in the Hamptons this weekend. I saw it in the society pages. That evening, they formulated a plan with Valencia's guidance. Bondi would enter Shadowcrest Saturday morning during minimal staffing. She would search both for Marlowe's portfolio and her mother's confiscated belongings. When Bondi left to prepare, Bondi turned to Valencia with haunted eyes. If she's caught, she won't be, Valencia interrupted firmly. Bondi's tougher than you realize. Saturday morning arrived with relentless speed. Bondi appeared at dawn, dressed inconspicuously, her expression resolute. You don't have to do this, Bondi said one final time. Bondi's smile held both determination and gentle reassurance. Some risks are worth taking. She hesitated, then pressed her lips briefly to his cheek, a gesture so unexpected that Bondi found himself speechless. For luck, she whispered, before disappearing into the morning shadows. The hours that followed were the longest of Bondi's life. He paced the small guest house, checking his silent phone obsessively. At precisely 11:17 a.m., a text appeared. Coming back, success. Relief washed through him, followed by renewed anxiety, until 40 minutes later, Bondi appeared at the door, slightly breathless but triumphant. In her hands she carried two items, a worn jewelry box inlaid with mother-of-pearl and a burgundy leather portfolio secured with a brass lock. My mother's box, she said, setting down the first item with reverence. And Marlowe's secrets. Within the hour, Valencia arrived. Using a letter opener, she carefully jimmied the portfolio's lock, revealing damning evidence, original documents with Marlowe's handwriting in the margins detailing the elaborate scheme to frame Bondi. Most crucial was a handwritten agreement between Marlowe and Julian Voss, outlining their plan and the division of assets once Bondi was neutralized. This changes everything, Valencia breathed, photographing each document. This isn't just evidence of fraud. It's conspiracy, perjury, criminal conversion. Is it enough? Bondi asked. More than enough to trigger a full investigation and open settlement negotiations from a position of strength. As Valencia departed with the portfolio, Bondi turned to Bondi, who sat examining her recovered jewelry box. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, he said softly. Bondi opened the box, revealing modest treasures, silver earrings with turquoise stones, a simple wedding band, a faded photograph of a smiling woman who shared Bondi's eyes and determined chin. My mother, she explained, touching the photo gently. And her jewelry, not valuable to anyone but me. Watching her reconnect with these precious mementos, Bondi felt something shift within him, a deepening understanding of true value, of wealth measured not in dollars, but in connection, in memory, in love. What you did today was extraordinary, he said, and dangerous. Why risk so much? Bondi considered the question, her fingers still tracing her mother's image. When I was a child, my mother always told me that justice isn't just about getting what you deserve. It's about standing for what's right, even when it costs you. She looked up, meeting his gaze. Today, I stood for truth, for her. Her answer, the depth of principle behind it, left Bodhi humbled by the moral clarity that guided her actions. And, she added, a smile touching her lips, perhaps a little for you too. In that moment, as spring sunlight spilled through the windows and real hope of vindication blossomed between them, Bodhi recognized that whatever the legal outcome, he had already received the most valuable possible result: the chance to see the world and himself through Bondi's eyes, to recognize value beyond price, strength beyond power, and beauty beyond surface, truths that had always surrounded him, but that he had been too blind to see until he lost everything that had once seemed important, and found in its place all that truly mattered. Chapter 10. Courtroom Revelations. The Manhattan Federal Courthouse loomed like a temple of justice, its columned facade a stark contrast to the modern glass towers surrounding it. 3 months had passed since Bondi retrieved Marlowe's incriminating portfolio, months of intense preparation by Valencia, who had built their case with masterful precision. Bodhi entered the courthouse with Bondi beside him and Valencia leading the way. Gone was the broken man of the guest house. In his place stood someone new, humble but composed, wearing a modest but dignified suit borrowed from Valencia's brother. "Remember," Valencia murmured as they approached the courtroom, "let me handle this. No reactions to provocations. The evidence speaks for itself." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. At the prosecution table sat Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Chen, whose interest had been piqued by Valencia's methodical presentation of evidence suggesting Marlowe and Julian Voss, not Bodhi, were the architects of the fraud. When Marlowe entered, she moved with calculated poise, every detail of her appearance designed to project innocence. Subtle Chanel suit, discreet jewelry, expression of wounded dignity. Behind her walked Julian Voss and a team of attorneys from Blackwood and Stern, legal titans known for their astronomical fees and ruthless tactics. Marlowe's eyes met Bodhi's across the room, surprise at his transformation quickly masked by practiced contempt. Her gaze then slid to Bondi, recognition flaring into momentary alarm before hardening. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Eleanor Harmon entered, known for her sharp intellect and zero tolerance for financial crimes. The proceedings began with U.S. Attorney Chen outlining the original charges against Bodhi Jet, then acknowledging new evidence that had prompted a review of the case. "Your Honor," Valencia rose, her small stature belying her formidable presence, "we move to dismiss all charges against Mr. Jet and request the court's consideration of evidence indicating Mrs. Jet and Mr. Voss orchestrated these financial crimes." Thornton Blackwood, Marlowe's lead attorney, immediately objected. "These accusations are based on questionably obtained evidence allegedly found under suspicious circumstances. The portfolio's chain of custody is well documented," Valencia countered, "and has been verified by forensic document examiners. Furthermore, the federal investigation has independently corroborated key elements through bank records and electronic correspondence." Judge Harmon studied both attorneys with cool assessment. "I'll allow the evidence presentation. Admissibility will be determined as we proceed." What followed was Valencia's methodical dismantling of the case against Bodhi. She presented forensic accounting reports tracking the elaborate web of transactions to accounts controlled by Marlowe and Julian, not Bodhi. Expert testimony confirmed signature forgeries on key documents. Most damning was former Cayman Islands bank officer Eliza Winters, who identified Marlowe and Julian from a video meeting where they established shell companies under false pretenses. Throughout the presentation, Bodhi remained composed, occasionally meeting Bondi's steady gaze. Her presence anchored him, a reminder that regardless of the outcome, he had already gained something far more valuable than legal vindication. Then came the pivotal moment. Marlowe was called to testify. She took the stand with practiced poise, her testimony a performance of wronged innocence. "I knew nothing of my husband's financial dealings," she insisted. "I was as shocked as anyone when the fraud was discovered." Valencia approached the witness stand, her expression calm but determined. "Mrs. Jett, are you familiar with a Cayman Islands account under the name Helios Holdings?" "No," Marlowe replied smoothly. "I have no knowledge of such accounts." "Interesting." Valencia produced a document. "Because we have here a signature card for that account bearing your signature, notarized 3 years ago." A flicker of unease crossed Marlowe's perfect features. "I sign many documents my husband presents. I wouldn't recall specifics." Valencia continued methodically, presenting a series of documents, each more damning than the last, each bearing Marlowe's signature or handwritten notes, each contradicting her previous testimony until her polished facade began to crack. The decisive moment came when Valencia produced the handwritten agreement between Marlowe and Julian, retrieved from the portfolio. "Would you please read page 3, paragraph 2 aloud for the court?" Valencia requested. Marlowe stared at the document, color draining from her face. I can't." "Allow me then," Valencia offered. "Once BJ is neutralized through the SEC investigation, assets will be liquidated and transferred according to the schedule in Appendix A, with 60% to MJ and 40% to JV. She looked up. "BJ being Bodie Jett, MJ being Marlowe Jett, and JV being Julian Voss, correct?" The courtroom fell silent as Marlowe's carefully constructed world collapsed. Her eyes darted to Julian, who was already whispering urgently to his attorney. "Mrs. Jett," Judge Harmon intervened, her voice sharp, "you are under oath." In that moment, something broke in Marlowe, not with dramatic tears, but with cold calculation. "I want immunity," she said flatly. "In exchange for testimony against Julian. It was his idea from the beginning." The courtroom erupted. Julian surged to his feet, shouting denials. Journalists rushed for exits to file breaking stories. Judge Harmon hammered her gavel, demanding order. Through it all, Bodie sat motionless, witnessing the implosion of his former life with strange detachment. The woman he had married had never existed. The empire he had built had been constructed on illusions. The fall that had nearly destroyed him had, paradoxically, saved him from a life devoid of genuine connection. His hand found Bondi's beneath the table, their fingers intertwining in silent understanding more profound than words. Outside on the courthouse steps, as Valencia fielded questions from reporters, Bodie and Bondi stood slightly apart from the media frenzy. "What happens now?" Bondi asked quietly. "Legally? The charges against me will be dismissed. There will be trials for Marlowe and Julian. Civil suits to recover assets." Bodie shook his head slightly. "But that's not what matters anymore." "What does matter?" His eyes met hers, filled with certainty that had nothing to do with courtrooms or verdicts. Beginning again, differently this time. As afternoon light bathed the courthouse steps in golden illumination, Bodie recognized that true justice had little to do with the legal proceedings behind them. It resided in the transformation wrought through loss and recovery, through the unexpected grace of being truly seen by someone who had every reason to turn away. And in that moment, surrounded by the chaos of media and legal aftermath, Bodie found himself centered in perfect clarity that whatever material assets might be restored to him paled in comparison to the wealth he had already found. A wealth without price, beyond measure, that no court could grant and no betrayal could take away. Chapter 11. Rebuilding with Purpose. Winter gave way to spring and spring to summer as the legal machinery of justice ground slowly forward. Marlowe and Julian both accepted plea deals rather than face trial, agreeing to forfeit ill-gotten assets in exchange for reduced sentences. The financial world buzzed with the spectacular scandal, with Bodhijet's vindication becoming as noteworthy as his fall had been. But Bodhi himself was conspicuously absent from the media circus. On a bright July morning, he stood in a modest office in downtown Manhattan, surveying freshly painted walls and simple furnishings. Sunlight streamed through windows bearing newly stenciled letters, JETT, Foundation for Medical Equity. "What do you think?" he asked Bondi, who was arranging framed photographs on a wall, images of her mother, of other patients whose families couldn't afford treatment, of the community clinic where the foundation would begin its work. "I think it's a beginning," she answered, stepping back to assess the display. "A good one." The months following the courtroom revelations had transformed them both. Bodhi had regained control of approximately 30% of his former assets, enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly, and enough to establish the foundation that now occupied most of his time and energy. Bondi had finally accepted his proposal of partnership, not romantic, not yet, but professional and purposeful. Half of the recovered assets had been placed in a trust bearing her mother's name, dedicated to providing medical care for those who couldn't afford it. With Bodhi's encouragement, she had also returned to nursing school, her education now fully funded. "The first grant applications are already coming in," Bodhi said, reviewing documents on his desk, a simple wooden piece, nothing like the imposing mahogany fortress of his former office. 3 community clinics and a mobile healthcare unit for underserved neighborhoods. "We should prioritize the mobile unit," Bondi suggested, now standing beside him, close enough that he could catch the faint scent of lavender that always surrounded her. "It reaches people who can't even get to clinics." Bodhi nodded, making notes. Their working relationship had evolved into a balanced partnership that honored both his business acumen and her first-hand understanding of medical inequity. They made decisions together, built programs together, reshaped what had been purely financial expertise into something that served humanity rather than profit. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said, setting down his pen. "The penthouse is finally out of litigation. It's been returned to me." Bondi looked up, surprised. "That's good news. Will you move back?" "I don't know." Bodhi turned to the window, gazing at the city skyline that had once represented conquest and now seemed merely architecture. "It feels like returning to a costume I've outgrown." "Then sell it," Bondi suggested practically. "Use the proceeds for the foundation." He smiled, appreciating her directness. "That's one option, but I was thinking—" He hesitated, venturing into territory they had carefully circumnavigated for months. "I was thinking it could be yours." Bondi stared at him. "Mine? What would I do with a penthouse? Live there, study there, start your clinic there someday." He met her gaze steadily. "It has 7 bedrooms, Bondi. It could become a residential facility for patients in transition." She studied him with the perceptive gaze that had seen through his defenses from the beginning. "This isn't about the penthouse, is it?" "No," he admitted. "It's about us." The word hung between them, simple but profound, encompassing a journey neither could have imagined when they first crossed paths at Shadowcrest Manor. "We've been careful," Bodhi continued, "professional, appropriate, and for good reason." "The power imbalance," Bondi acknowledged softly, "which still exists in some ways," he agreed. "But I hope, we've built something more balanced now, something true." Bondi moved to the window beside him, their reflections overlapping in the glass. "I didn't save you so you would love me, Bodhi. I know." He turned to face her directly. "You saved me because that's who you are, and I love you because I finally see who you are. All of you." A smile touched her lips, not the professional smile she wore in foundation meetings, but something more intimate, more genuine. "And who am I, Bodhijet?" The woman who saw humanity in someone who had forgotten his own. His voice softened. The woman who offered mercy when she had every right to demand justice. The woman who taught me that true wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts. Bondi's eyes held his, searching for truth she had learned to recognize in every line of his face. "And who are you now?" "Still learning," he answered honestly. "Still becoming, but someone who wants to be worthy of you, not because of what I can give you, but because of who I can be with you." For a moment they stood in silence, the culmination of their extraordinary journey suspended between them. From master and servant, to allies, to partners, to this undefined territory where feelings long acknowledged but carefully contained might finally find expression. "I need time," Bondi said finally, "not because I don't feel what I feel, but because some journeys can't be rushed." "I understand." And he did, perhaps the greatest gift of his transformation. "Whatever you decide about us, about the penthouse, about anything, it doesn't change the foundation, the work, the partnership we've built." She nodded, relief and something more complex warming her expression. Then, with characteristic directness, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, not on the cheek as she had before the courthouse, but fully, intentionally against his mouth. A kiss that contained neither promise nor demand, but possibility. "Thank you," she whispered as she drew back, "for becoming someone I could love without compromising who I am." The simple honesty of her words, the recognition of how far they had both traveled to reach this moment, filled Body with certainty that transcended the uncertainty of their future, whether she accepted the penthouse, whether their relationship evolved beyond partnership, whether the foundation succeeded beyond their hopes, or faced unforeseen challenges. They had already achieved the most improbable victory. They had recognized each other as equals, as human beings worthy of dignity, of respect, of love. And in a world that had once valued them so differently, that recognition was the most revolutionary act of all. As afternoon light bathed the simple office in gold, they turned together to the work before them. Grant applications to review, programs to develop, lives to touch through the resources they now shared, not as patron and recipient, not as superior and subordinate, but as partners in purpose. In that shared purpose, in that balanced partnership, in that mutual recognition, lay the seeds of a love unlike anything Body had ever known, not possession or passion or convenience, but the profound connection of two souls who had seen each other at their most vulnerable and found something worth nurturing, worth protecting, worth building upon, something that, unlike the empire he had lost, could never be taken away. Chapter 12. Full Circle. Autumn painted Brooklyn in amber and gold as Body surveyed their brownstone from the sidewalk. 2 years had passed since the courthouse victory, transforming his world completely. Inside waited Bondi, who had agreed to marry him 6 months ago after they'd built a foundation of genuine equality and respect. Tonight marked a special anniversary, not of their first meeting, but of the night she had found him in the snow, the beginning of his redemption. "Ready?" Bondi asked, emerging from the house in a simple burgundy dress that accentuated her natural beauty. At 30, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her true purpose. "For your surprise?" "Absolutely," he replied, helping her into the waiting car. Their driver took them not to an upscale Manhattan restaurant, but to a familiar address in Queens. Mercy Hospital stood transformed from Bondi's painful memories into a beacon of hope. "What are we doing here?" she asked, her hand tightening on his. "You'll see," he promised. Inside, they were greeted by the hospital director, who led them to a newly renovated wing. Above the entrance gleamed a plaque, the Annis Gala Center for Palliative Care. Bondi's breath caught as they entered spaces designed with dignity and compassion. private rooms with comfortable family accommodations, meditation gardens visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, art and music therapy areas. The first of 3 centers, Bodhi explained as she moved through the space in wonder, fully funded for 20 years, serving patients regardless of ability to pay. In the central garden courtyard, familiar faces awaited. Valencia, doctor; Phillips, staff from Bondi's community clinic; even Verena from Shadowcrest. In the center stood a marble bench inscribed with words that caught the sunset light. "We have dark skin, but not dark hearts." In memory of Anise Gala, who taught the world to see with the heart's vision. Tears flowed freely down Bondi's face as she traced the inscription with gentle fingers. She would have loved this. Not for her name, but for the people who will find comfort here. As their friends kept respectful distance, Bodhi knelt beside the bench, producing a small velvet box. Inside was not an ostentatious diamond, but a ring of warm gold, set with turquoise that matched her mother's earrings. "Bondi Gala," he said quietly, "you saw me when I was invisible to myself. You offered dignity when I had none to give. You taught me that true wealth lies in who we become for each other." His voice steadied with certainty. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Bondi's eyes held his, swimming with emotion. 2 years ago, I would have thought this moment impossible. Her smile broke through tears. But perhaps the most beautiful journeys are the ones we never could have imagined. "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope evident in his voice. "It's a yes," she confirmed, extending her hand. "Not because of this center or anything material. It's yes because you've become a man worthy of being loved exactly as you are." Their small ceremony took place that winter in the same garden, now enclosed in glass against December's chill. Bondi, 5 months pregnant, wore flowing ivory silk that celebrated her changing body. Their vows spoke not of possession, but of partnership, of seeing and honoring each other's true self through all seasons. When February's fierce winds rattled the brownstone windows, Bondi awakened in darkness, her hand finding Bodhi's. "It's time," she whispered, remarkably calm despite the contractions beginning. Through the snowstorm and the hours of labor that followed, Bodhi never left her side, supporting her through each wave of pain, his presence steady and unwavering. "You can do this," he told her as dawn broke through hospital windows. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." Bondi gripped his hand with surprising force. "We're doing this together," she reminded him, "just like everything else." At 7:42 that morning, their daughter was born, a perfect blend of both parents, with Bondi's determined chin and Bodhi's thoughtful eyes. 17 minutes later their son arrived, tiny fists clenched as if ready to face the world. As Bodhi held his newborn children, tears flowing freely, he looked at Bondi, exhausted but radiant, and knew with absolute certainty that this love, this family, this purpose they had built together was the true meaning of redemption. "What shall we name them?" the nurse asked. Bondi and Bodhi exchanged a look of perfect understanding. "Anise," Bondi said softly, touching their daughter's cheek. "After my mother." "And Xavier," Bodhi added. "It means bright or new house, because that's what they are, our new beginning." As morning light filled the hospital room, Bodhi understood that the twins in his arms represented not just their future, but a bridge between worlds that had once seemed impossibly divided. In their children's faces, neither black nor white, but beautifully, perfectly both, lay the promise that barriers could be overcome, that divisions could heal, that love could transform not just individual lives, but generations to come. "We have dark skin," he whispered to his children, "but not dark hearts." Bondi reached for his hand, her eyes filled with love. "And they will have your eyes," she told him softly, Not the ones that looked through me once, but the ones that learned to see people for who they truly are. They had come full circle, from master and servant to husband and wife, from blindness to vision, from emptiness to abundance. This was their redemption. This was their legacy. This was their love, and it was beautiful beyond measure.